We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
We were in the Philippines on R&R for 10 days, and we had an emergency recall to the ship. And it was about 10 o'clock at night. And of course, all the pilots were in the officers' club drunk. And so they got us all back aboard the ship. And we got an aircraft carrier underway at night. It was midnight, and that ship left port, and I said, you don't do that, okay? You just don't. An aircraft carrier is too big to be turning around at night in a harbor.
Eaton Llewellyn Kittrell, or Kit Smith, flew the F-8 Crusader during the war in Vietnam, and he was part of the first bombing mission over Hanoi in the war. This conversation is fascinating. We got down to strike operations, and there were 6 Marine guards on the door to strike operations. I said, this ain't good. This ain't good at all. My name is Josh Roe, and this is Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. I'm from Chattanooga. I was the middle of 3 sons, and I went to Baylor. And then I went to the University of North Carolina after that. And now, upon graduation from the University of North Carolina, I followed in my brother's footsteps. He enlisted in the Marine Corps and was a pilot for the Marines. And I thought that might be a good thing to do, except I wanted to enlist with the Navy. And so I enlisted and signed up and everything. And December 23rd of a given year, my brother was killed flying for the Marines. And it was February of the following year that I graduated from college and went into the United States Navy, into the flight program. And I'd like to kill my mother, okay? She was terribly upset about that, and I understand that. And but I was already signed up and ready to go, so I went. And I went to Pensacola, and to enlist, I got on the first airplane ride I had ever been on to go from Chattanooga to Pensacola to fly for 5 years for the Navy. And I thought to myself, I sure hope I like this. So, I guess so. So I ended up in Pensacola and went through the flight program. And the flight training program for the Navy is an 18-month program. Right. And I did pretty well. Well enough to end up in the jet syllabus. And the jet syllabus takes about the top 10% of a graduating class. The rest of them go into helicopters, anti-submarine warfare, and what have you. And I got into the jet program, and from the jet program, I got into the line for fighter pilots. And that's exactly where I wanted to be. Yeah. And I thought that would be a good thing. So I went from Texas, where I finished the flight program, out to Miramar, California. And somebody says, is that where the, what do you call it, the Top Gun? Top Gun, right. Top Gun school was created, and it was. We had a part in the creation of that program. But I went out there, and for the next 2.5 years, I guess, I flew out of Miramar, California. When I signed up, somebody said, you must have really been brave. No, that wasn't the issue at all. When I signed up, nobody ever heard of Madam New. Nobody ever heard of Vietnam. I mean, it was somewhere over there, and we knew it was going on, but it wasn't a war at that particular point. But by the time I finished being checked out in the fighter plane that I was going to fly, by the time I finished that program, which was about another 6 months,
By the time I finished that program, the war was on. And I was actually sent overseas to replace a pilot that had been shot down. I think he had flown 2 missions and was shot down over Vietnam, and I was sent over to replace him. So I started, that was the way the war started for me. I joined my squadron on Yankee Station. Now, Yankee Station was a point in the Gulf of Tonkin that where the carrier was located. The Gulf of Tonkin is the body of water immediately to the east of North Vietnam. The carrier was stationed in that locale, and we would fly off of the carrier. Somebody says you flew, you must have been in the Air Force. Well, no, not necessarily. Every branch of the service has their own air wing, but there was a difference between the Air Force and the Navy. One of them was occasioned by North Vietnam. After the Air Force pilot flew 100 missions, he was through. He came back to the States. Not so with Navy pilots. Navy pilots went over for 2 combat tours. A combat tour would last anywhere between 6 and 8 months. And during the period of time that we were over there, we would fly however many missions we were assigned. I wrote the flight schedule for the squadron. I flew 159 combat missions. There were a few pilots that flew more than that, but most pilots flew somewhat less than that. The other difference between the Air Force and the Navy is that the Air Force lands on 12,000 feet of runway and a nice wide, 300 feet wide, 12,000 feet long, and the Navy lands on ships. And all I can tell you about that is it's not 12,000 feet long, and it's not 300 feet wide. But we got used to that, and and that's the way we conducted operations. When I first went over there, the president, he talked to his advisors. His military advisors, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, let's go, how am I going to conduct the air war over North Vietnam? His military advisor said, let's go in and begin saturation bombing and bomb them into submission. That's a good choice. But his political advisor said, oh no, China and Russia won't sit still for that. We ought to go in and fight an increasingly escalated war effort in response to however strong the war effort was being made by North Vietnam. Now, to make a decision like that is not going to win a war. But President Johnson was a political beast, if he was nothing else. So he went with his political advisor, and he commenced Operation Rolling Thunder. I was a participant in Operation Rolling Thunder. Now, the purpose of the Rolling Thunder was this. It was designed to interdict the flow of military supplies from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. If we could stop military supplies from getting to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, they'd run out of bullets and the war would be over. And good theory. And so we were to stop the traffic as it flowed south. Now, how did the military supplies get into North Vietnam? Some of them came across the Chinese border. The China border with China goes all the way to top across North Vietnam. But the vast majority of them came through Haiphong Harbor. Haiphong was the only deep water port in North Vietnam, and I saw ships from all over the world, friends of the United States, all floating military supplies in Haiphong Harbor. So here we were after the supplies caught up coming out of China. They got together with the supplies in Haiphong, and they had to make it all the way down through North Vietnam. We called the roads on which they traveled, we called it the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was not a superhighway. There were no paved roads south of Vietnam. It was all dirt. So the Ho Chi Minh Trail was made up of a myriad of dirt roads, motorbike trails, bicycle paths, walking paths, any way that these supplies could get into South Vietnam. And we were supposed to stop the traffic as it flowed south so that the Viet Cong would run out of supplies. It didn't work. The Viet Cong never ran out of bullets, okay? And another reason it didn't work, we lost more than 500 military aircraft in Operation Rolling Thunder. And I say more than 500 because I don't think we'll ever know how many aircraft were actually lost. And the reason we'll never know it is because of the problems in the United States. I flew on one mission in which there were 14 of us that went in, and only 10 of us came out. And in 5 minutes over the target, we lost 4 aircraft, 3 pilots killed, 1 that was captured. That one that was captured was my roommate, and he came out of the Hanoi Hilton, the prisoner of war compound there, 8 years later. Okay, so his midlife was gone. I mean, just gone. But we lost those 4 pilots. But we got the target. We did get the target, which was the electric power plant, hydroelectric power plant in downtown Hanoi. I mean, we went downtown that day, got the target, but I can assure you that the results of that mission were never reported back here. Because, and here's the problem, the young people in America were revolting. There were riots on every college campus throughout America. They started off as peaceful demonstrations, but you arm them with information like that, and they became an uncontrollable riot. So we couldn't tell them the truth. So I don't really know how many aircraft were lost over North Vietnam. You may be interested in the type of mission I flew. I flew that airplane up there, the F-8 Crusader. It is a supersonic, single-seat fighter. It's a beautiful airplane. Weighed about 28,000 pounds. It's a lot of fun to fly, a lot of fun. But it was a very unforgiving aircraft.
You mentioned that bombing mission into Hanoi.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw that interview on the Library of Congress deal, you said it was the first mission that you guys flew into Hanoi. Is that right?
We were the very first aircraft over Hanoi.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because, as I understand too, the targets were interesting. You didn't fly over a lot of cities like you did in World War II, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of explain some of that, kind of like
Sure.
the objectives and those things?
Sure. When we started Operation Rolling Thunder, it really was what it was started out to be, and that is the interdiction of traffic going into South Vietnam. And so our targets were wooded areas where trucks might hide during the day, get off the road and get under a canopy of trees, or huts where we thought military supplies were being stored. And you say, well, how do you know whether military supplies were there or not? Well, if you hit a hut and the fireball roll comes up about 8,000 feet in the air, something's down there, okay? And we did a lot of that. But Operation Rolling Thunder morphed into a totally different area by the end of the second cruise, which was for me was in 1967.
And what year was the first time?
66 and 67.
Gotcha.
So in 67, it still was Operation Rolling Thunder, but we were going after strategic military targets. And in so doing, like the power plant in downtown Hanoi, like the MiG airfield south of Haiphong, from which they were launching aircraft. And when we started out, there was a 10-mile restricted area around Haiphong. There was a 30-mile no-fly zone around Hanoi. But by the end of the time that I was over there, we were in the Philippines on R&R for 10 days, okay? And we had an emergency recall to the ship. And it was about 10 o'clock at night. And of course, all the pilots were in the officers' club drunk. And so they got us all back aboard the ship. And we got an aircraft carrier underway at night. It was midnight, and that ship left port. And I said, you don't do that, okay? You just don't. An aircraft carrier is too big to be turning around at night in a harbor. So I knew something was going on. It was bad. And we set sail out of Subic Bay in the Philippines at night under flank speed, everything that carrier had in it was being poured into it, okay? And the next morning I get a call, and the call is from strike operations. No, it's from the skipper of our squadron. And the skipper said, Kit, I wrote the flight schedule. He said, I need 6 pilots on a mission, and they need to go to the ready room in about 2 hours to get briefed. Need to go strike operations. They'll get briefed down there. I said, okay, Skipper, do you want to go? He said, no, sir, I sure don't. I said, okay, no problem. So I said, I kicked my roommate upstairs, and I said, hey, you want to go? And he said, yeah, I'll go. So he and I signed up with 4 others, okay? We got down to strike operations, and there were 6 Marine guards on the door to strike operations. I said, this ain't good. This ain't good at all. We walk in there, and on orders from the President of the United States, I mean, this was a telegraph from the President's office. He was lifting the 30-mile restriction on Hanoi, and we were going after the power plant in downtown Hanoi. Now, Josh, I didn't know it, but the bomber squadrons that were with us had trained on the first of the laser-guided bombs, okay, which are pretty common now. But back then, it was brand new stuff. And the laser bomb that they had worked off of light contrast. If you could get a white background with a black dot in it and lock onto that, you had it, okay? The bomb would go at the black dot. That was the theory, all right? So 2 bombers and 12 flak suppressors were launched. We were still 300 miles off the coast. I mean, a long way. And they launched 2 tankers with us, and we tanked all the way to North Vietnam. And then we went into North Vietnam, and there was a big strike from the Enterprise immediately to the east, right on the 30-mile arc. There was a big strike from the Air Force, Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, on the west of the 30-mile arc. And the theory was that the 14 of us were going to sneak in there, and all the guns were going to be pointed east and west, and we were just going to run right between them. The theory didn't work, okay? But my flak site, the flak site that I was going after, was on the far side of Hanoi. And so me and my section leader were the very first American aircraft over Hanoi. And our pitch-up point, when we were supposed to start our run, our pitch-up point was the lake in Central Park in downtown Hanoi. And I can still remember the SAM, the surface-to-air missiles, kept coming over the top of us, just forcing us lower and lower and lower. And somebody behind me said, F8 over Central Park, you're blowing water. And we were making a wake going across, and we were good and supersonic, okay? We were making a wake blowing through there. And we pitched up. That was our pitch-up point. So both of us reared back on the stick, and we were supposed to go to 8,000 feet, roll in, roll wings level, deliver our ordnance at 5,000 feet, and pull out by 3,000 feet. And I remember we were climbing, and I thought, we got to be at 8,000 feet. I looked down my altimeter, we were at 2,800 feet. That's as high as we got. And we rolled into the target, released our ordnance, and then broke left. I took a hit as we were braking to the left, and of the 14 aircraft that went in, 4 didn't make it back. 3 of them were killed, and my roommate was captured that day. I came back, I was the first one hit when we got down in the Red River Valley. I was the first one hit. I took a hit right behind the canopy, but I was still flying, so it didn't make any difference. I went on to the target. And then I got hit again as I pulled off the target. And that was just a bad day. But the losses were staggering. But we were doing something that was really good. I mean, to knock the lights out in Hanoi permanently, okay, was a good thing. And the bomber pilot one of the bomber pilots was shot down. The other one got back and they started showing the film. And the film, he locked on to a window in the power plant. And that bomb went right in that window. It was unbelievable. We just weren't used to dropping something like that. So it went right, but it was only a 500-pound bomb. Right. It wasn't a big one. It was only a 500-pound bomb. But the roof on the power plant came up about that far and then settled right back down again. And it didn't do really anything to the building, but I'm sure it destroyed everything on the inside. So we got the target. We felt like we were doing something productive for a change rather than chasing trucks under jungle canopies. And so while the losses were increased, we felt better about what we were doing. Now, you want to talk about losses? In a normal cruise, you'll lose a pilot. A squadron had 20 pilots in it, okay? You'll probably lose one for some reason. You know, accidents used to happen aboard ship all the time. And we weren't bulletproof by any means. So you'd lose one pilot. But in a combat cruise, your losses were somewhere between 4 and 5 of the pilots that left America with you were not coming home with you. That's about a 20 to 25% loss ratio. And that is staggering. But you really didn't realize it because other pilots, other than me, came over to replace pilots that were shot down. So you still flew with a complement of about 20 pilots. But 4 or 5 of those guys that left the United States with you were not going to come back with you. And that is staggering when you think about it. And that's why I think we were limited to 2 combat cruises. We could not go more than twice, 6 to 8 months. So 6 months in, 6 months back, right back over for another 6 to 8 months. And that was the reason the limitation was established, because after that, you were really dealing with negative odds. I mean, when you lose 25% of your pilots every time you go over, if you make it through 2 of them, you're doing something. You're doing pretty well. I got hit 6 times, maybe, I think. I never had to eject. I never had to get out of my airplane. My takeoffs still equal my landings. That's a good score for a pilot. And there was one time when I was so beat up I had to go into Da Nang. I landed at Marine Corps Air Station Da Nang. And because I took a hit in the tail section of the aircraft, and I was on a photo run. That was another type of mission we flew. And I was a photo escort. And we were doing a ground mapping of a particularly bad section of North Vietnam. And they shot at him, but I got hit. Okay. I don't know how that happened. I was on that photo run, and I diverted him away from the fire, but as we swung back to get on track again, I got hit. And I said, I've been hit, and we headed for the ocean, trying to get to the ocean. If I made it to the ocean, I could set up for an ejection and get picked up by a Navy search and rescue helicopter. If I had to get out right then, I would have probably been killed in the ejection. We were doing about 450 miles an hour. That's not a good speed at which to eject. But if I'd made it through the ejection, they would have probably used me as target practice as I floated down. Pilots were shot in the chute and killed in the chute as they floated down. But if I'd been lucky to get to the floor, I probably would have never made it to the Hanoi Hilton because I would have been passing through. It was about a 400-mile trek to get up north to the Hanoi Hilton. And I would have been passing through hundreds of little villages, all of whom knew I was the enemy, and they probably killed me. So when I got back out over the water, I breathed a sigh of relief. But the photo bird said, "Let me fly up under you and see what happens." And so steadied out there, and he flew up underneath me, and he keys the mic. He says, "Wow."
Is that what you want to hear in that moment?
And and then he said, "Drop my hook." Now the hook, of course, was the way we got back aboard the carrier. And when you drop your hook, it comes down and it locks. And there is a defined locking point to that hook. I mean, it's in position to grab that wire. And it's a big old hook. I mean, it's got to stop 28,000 pounds going about 160 miles an hour. So it's a big hook. And my hook came out of the belly of my aircraft. He didn't tell me right then, but he told me later. He said the hook came out of the belly of your aircraft, and he's sort of flapping around in the breeze back there. He said, "I don't think you better get back aboard the carrier." So I didn't. I went to Da Nang, and I landed, and they put fresh parts on my airplane in a couple of days, and I flew back out, and I was okay. Right. So I've never had to eject, but I did have to divert one time. And it's not that I was a particularly good pilot. I mean, there were pilots that were better than I was, and they lost their lives. And somehow I made it through, and I was unscathed. I did a lot of growing up in a couple of years. I saw a lot of stuff I didn't want to see. Of course, I hate to admit this, but your ego, your head is about that big around, because you're one of 80 people aboard that aircraft carrier. And that aircraft carrier is out there for the sole purpose of launching and recovering you. And I mean, your head just gets inflated. You get to the point where I'm bulletproof and I can do anything I want to. But then you see your friend die, and you're not bulletproof. You're just not. Why him instead of you? I have no idea.
I heard you tell the story of I believe it was the day after the Hanoi mission. You had to fly again that next day.
I had to fly again that night.
And I remember you talking about that. Like you can't go into that doubting yourself. You have to have that attitude.
You absolutely have to think you're invincible. That night, it was going to be an easy hop. It was going to be an easy flight. I never got used to flying at night. I haven't got but 25 night carrier. I got about 250 carrier landings, but I've only got about 25 of them at night, okay? And that aircraft that I flew was grounded from flying at night aboard a carrier the year after I quit flying it. It wasn't allowed aboard ship 2 years after that. They didn't even want it aboard ship. It was a very unstable aircraft. And the tolerances on that airplane were just unbelievably small. If our approach speed of the carrier was 142 knots. That's what, 155, 60 miles an hour. 142 knots. Our stall speed, 138. 4 knots between an optimum approach to a carrier and falling out of the air. That's just not good. And then I was an LSO, in addition to being a pilot. The guy that LSO would stand on the back of the ship, talk to the planes as they come in. I was an LSO. And if your minimum acceptable clearance, is 9 feet between your hook point and the ramp. As you cross the ramp, minimum acceptable is 9 feet. If the F8 was right on glide slope, right on center line, perfect approach, 9.1 feet. That's just too tight. That's just too tight. So when I say it was an unforgiving aircraft, it was. Around the ship, it was very, very difficult with that airplane. And we lost pilots around the ship. We did. But
let me ask you
but
this.
back to the black A3.
Okay.
They wanted to know if the lights were on in Hanoi. After we had hit the power plant, they wanted to know if the lights were on, and they sent an A3, a black A3. He totally dark. We rendezvoused over here, and I was supposed to accompany the A3. So I launched, got up there and was going around in circles above the carrier. And here comes this A3. Of course, I don't see him at all. I see his anti-collision lights and all that kind of stuff. Well, I was supposed to fall behind him in radar trail, just paint him on radar, stay 5 to 10 miles behind him and make sure he came out all right. Okay, that was my job. But when I got up there, my radar went down. And I thought, Lord, help me, how am I going to do this? So I rendezvoused on him. And I said, I tell you what, cut your lights off and let's see if I can fly. Let's see if I can fly on you. So an A3 was a twin engine thing. And I latched on to his right engine, and the flame coming out of the engine, it was a nice red glow. And I thought, well, I can sort of stick around on that, and I'll fly with you and just up close to you, and we'll come out together. Okay, everybody was in agreement. I didn't want to cancel the flight. I mean, you know. So we went. We got overseas. Now, when you go over the beach, you don't fly wings level. That's a certain disaster. I mean, if you're here and wings level, you're going to be there, and they can shoot you down. Okay. Yeah. So it was always a matter of jinxing back and forth, changing altitude, changing airspeed, and changing heading. Okay. So here we go, over the beach, and away we go. And I think I'm right with him. And then he says, flares away in 1 minute. He's going to drop some flares to take pictures with. Flares away in 1 minute. I said, Roger. I was right, flying right with him. He popped those flares. He was 4 miles ahead of me. Now, what in the world was I flying on? I mean, I guess I was flying on my imagination. And how in the world did I get separated from him? I mean, I don't know. But somebody was looking out for me that night. We could have had a mid-air collision.
4 miles.
He was 4 miles ahead of me. I said, I'll see you when we get out over the water. And we both turned to the water at the same time. But it's crazy things like that. You look back on it and you say, you big dummy. And yet when you did it, it seemed like a very logical thing to do. And now Josh, I know you're in the reporting business, but over there, we had the Stars and Stripes, okay? That's all we had. And we would open up the front page of that paper and look at that thing that, man, look at us, we made headlines. And back here in the United States, we were lucky to make the last page of the paper.
Right.
I came home after my second cruise, and it's easier to fly the airplanes off the carrier than it is to barge them off. You know, they could land in, the carrier could come into San Diego and they'd barge the airplane over to Miramar, California. Well, that takes time and money and everything else. It's just easier to fly them off. So we were about 600 miles off the coast of the United States, and they said, okay, let's launch the fighters, you know, get them out of here. And so I got an airplane and flew it into Miramar, California, landed, and there was the Navy band, and playing the Stars and Stripes, and all the wives were there, and their family were there, all that kind of stuff. And it was a great homecoming. I drive off the base, and my car is egged and tomatoed as I drive off the base at Miramar, California. And I thought, what in the world is going on? I mean, it was so bizarre. And I didn't realize that people hated us.
So you had no idea when you were there that
No.
that was the sentiment at the time.
And it had gotten so much worse. After the first cruise, it was hostile, but it wasn't inflammatory. And when we got home that second cruise, I thought, Lord have mercy, what have we done? What have we been doing? Nobody ever said, thank you, we appreciate you, yada, yada, yada. Nothing. It was just a big void. And it was so sad, but that's the way it was. And
how'd that affect you?
Not very much, to tell you the truth. You couldn't let it affect you. I mean, you were so pumped up from reading the Stars and Stripes and all that kind of stuff. You were so pumped up and you thought you had done something fabulous. And the electric power plant in downtown Hanoi was fabulous. I mean, that was huge. And we were thinking, and we shot down more MiGs than any other squadron has ever shot down. I think that was a high water mark for the whole war. Shot down 13 of them. But so we thought, man, look at us. We are heroes. And we were so pumped up from that it really didn't make any difference, the reception that we got back here.
You talked to a lot of Vietnam veterans who it did affect them. It did hurt them, you know.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
I'm sure it did. But maybe they didn't have the advantage of getting their head inflated to about that big around. Okay? Yeah. I mean, really.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
And we were important. We were important. We were the ones that took the war to North Vietnam. And we got in the enemy's back pocket and we made a mess of things. Okay? So we were I don't think, Josh, really that they prepared us well enough to come home. Okay? They sang our praises all the way back across the Pacific Ocean. Okay? Let us know that we were the greatest, we had done a great job, yada, yada, yada. And I bet a lot of enlisted men that were on the ground in South Vietnam never heard any of that, ever. And my hat's off to them for being able to come back and withstand what was going on in the United States. As a matter, that's interesting, Josh, now that you mentioned that. There have been a lot of people, a lot of ladies, organizations, veterans of foreign wars, organizations, all that kind of stuff that have tried to make up for what happened when we got home. And I've gone to a couple of those things. I don't really pay much attention to them, but I went to one, and this lady asked me where I was and what I'd done and all this kind of stuff. I don't remember her name, but she was in tears, trying to explain to me how much she appreciated what we had done. And I looked at her like she was crazy. I thought, lady, it's okay. I came home 25 years ago. It's going to be all right. And I really didn't understand why she was so distressed about it. But she got it. She got it. We were treated like dirt when we got home, and she was trying to make up for it. But I really didn't see that when I got back here. Yeah. I really didn't. And maybe that's stupidity on my part, but I think it was because of the way we were treated. I really do.
You came home, and at some point after you got home, you went to law school. And
yes.
As the war was still going on.
Yeah. Well, everybody was out protesting the war, you know, and law students were the worst. I mean, they were the very worst. They were the ringleaders of any. If you want somebody to protest, get yourself an aspiring lawyer. I mean, he'll do it upright. So they were all out protesting the war, and I just went to the library and studied. Mm-hmm. And you know, he who studies the most usually gets to the top of the class. And so I did all right in law school. Came back here. I didn't like the practice of law at all. Yeah. I didn't. It was, if you like working on other people's problems when they can't solve them anymore, yeah, that's what a lawyer does. I just didn't like that. Yeah. So I dropped out of law school and dropped out of the practice of law and went into business. And some of it was successful and some of it wasn't. But that was another imprint that Vietnam made on me. It made me a risk taker.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Up until then, I was pretty cautious, pretty middle of the road, all that kind of thing. But when you do something like that and you're successful at it and you don't get hurt, you think, God, I like that. I did like it. And so I took some risk in business that I shouldn't have. Okay, lost a couple of companies, but I won a couple too. So, you know, That's me. That's what I did for the rest of my life. And then I retired from business when I ran the Mack truck dealership on 23rd Street. We sold that dealership. It was a successful sale, pocketed some money, and they didn't want me. The people that bought us didn't particularly want me. And so I said, well, you don't have to take me. I'll go do something else. So I signed up as a missionary with the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. And my wife and I spent the next 3.5 years in Africa. And we worked in Zambia, ministering to a tribe of about 1 million people.
Back to the thought of the percentages of the guys you lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read about Jim Stockdale and that kind of stuff. How much do they prepare you for the possibility of that, as far as what might happen?
They don't. They do not. You are not prepared to die or to be taken captive. When I said 20 to 25%, you lose 4 or 5 out of the 20. That's 20 to 25%. All of them are not dead by any stretch, okay? I think there were 591 POWs released from the Hanoi Hilton at the end of the war. Of those 591, I haven't calculated it exactly, but I bet you 80% of them were pilots that flew over North Vietnam. Stockdale for one, yeah.
All the guys that was with him specifically were all pilots.
Yeah, all pilots. And most of them were. So they're not all dead. The 25% not all dead. Some of them died. Admittedly, they did. But a lot of them came home at the end of the war. But imagine that. You're flying along one day, footloose and fancy free, and for the next 8 years, you were confined to about a 3x5 cell. I'm telling you, you talk about a mental adjustment.
Yeah, beaten, tortured, all that stuff.
All that stuff. And I don't know how badly they were tortured. I know my roommate that got shot down, he broke his leg in the ejection, okay? They didn't reset his leg. He still walks with a limp today. I haven't seen him, but I know he does. I mean, he was hurt. But they don't prepare us for stuff like that. They don't look at the downside. In the training command, they teach you to be the very best pilot you can be. And if you're the best pilot you can be, and you're flying good aircraft that are well maintained by mechanics that are trained to do what they do, there's no reason why you should go down. That's the theory. That's the theory.
Yeah.
That's the theory, okay? And so they never really talk about your being shot down. We know what happens, but from my perspective, as a pilot, I never thought about that. I never thought. I got scared. When I got hit, it's scary. It is scary. I'll tell you how I know. When I that photo run that I was on, they record all the radio transmissions that you have, and it started on the flight day. There were only 2 of us flying, me and the photo bird. All flight operations were canceled, okay? And so there was just me and him flying. And his call sign was Cork Tip. My call sign, I was a page boy. And the call sign of the ship, it was Rampage. It was the USS Hancock. But we didn't want to let anybody know the Hancock was on Yankee Station. So we go up and we man our aircraft, and Cork Tip started first, and he keys his mic. He said, Rampage, Cork Tip's up. Rampage says, Roger, Cork Tip. A few minutes later, I get started. I said, Rampage, Page Boy's up. And they said, Roger, Page Boy, Page Boy and Cork Tip, you are a go. We taxied forward, we launched, we rendezvoused overhead the ship like we were supposed to at about 20,000 feet. And the next call sign you hear is that Rampage, this is Page Boy and Cork Tip, we are holding hands outbound. That meant we were together, we had successfully rendezvoused, we were outbound from the ship going towards the coast of North Vietnam. And Rampage says, Roger, call feet dry. Now, feet dry was when you went from the ocean to the land, okay? Nobody's going to shoot at you over the ocean, but when you got over the land, it got a little tight. So a few minutes will go by and you hear this Rampage, page boy, court tip, or feet dry, feet dry. Roger, boys, have a safe flight, call feet wet. Roger, we go in, and I'm the first one to spot where we're going. And I said, court tip, check your 2 o'clock low. And he said, Roger, court tip is in. We start our run, and it was awful. I mean, awful. And I say, court tip, brake right, hard, pull. And he pulled around to the right, and I said, all right, back on track. And he comes back around on track. And then I get hit. I thought, oh my goodness. I said, court tip, this page boy, I've been hit. Let's head for the water. Head for the water, you know about over the water. And I was all shot up, went to Da Nang, came back out to the carrier and landed 2 days later. The skipper of the squadron was he led our squadron, there's no question about that, but he was also our mother. I mean, here we were 21 and 22 years old. I mean, and the skipper was about 38, 40, something like that. So he kind of watched after us, he kind of like a mother hen. So he meets me on the flight deck. He said, you all right? You head on straight? Ready to go? Yeah. I said, sure, skipper, I'm okay. He said, let's go down and debrief this mission in strike operations. So that was a little unusual. Usually you went to the ready room, debrief the mission there. I said, sure, skipper, I'll drop my flight gear in the ready room and I'll go down to strike ops and see you down there. Now, I didn't know it, but every radio transmission is recorded. In case something goes wrong, they go back and replay the recording to see if they can piece it all together. So I get down to strike ops and they start playing the recording. You hear this, Rampage, court tip is up, Roger, court tip. Rampage, page boy's up, Roger, page boy. Page boy and court tip, you are go. Rampage, this is page boy and court tip, we are holding hands outbound. Roger, page boy and court tip, call feet dry. Rampages, page boy and court tip, we are feet dry, feet dry. Roger, boys, have a safe flight, call feet wet. Court tip, check your 2 o'clock low. Roger, court tip is in. Court tip, brake right, hard, pull. Now back on track. And then in the voice, I can't emulate today if I had to, but it sounded something like this. Court tip, this is page boy, I've been hit. Oh, Lord. It took me till 10 years after I got out of the military before I could tell that story almost. But I tell that story when I talk to people. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's not. Courage is when you're staring fear right in the face and you overcome that fear and you do what is expected of you. That's what courage is. And that's what we did. I have 159 missions, and the 159th one scared me just as bad as the first one did.
A big thank you to Vietnam veteran Kit Smith for this conversation on Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. This podcast is a production of News Channel 9, Fox Chattanooga, and Sinclair Broadcast Group Chattanooga. I hope you join me again real soon.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.